Hello everybody, it's the Historical Gamer once again, and today we're returning to War in the Pacific, our play-by-email game against XTRG, and you're now looking at the playthrough of January 1st of 1942, the combat results. This is a game where we're playing as the Allies, XTRG is playing as the Axis. We're playing the game by email. We're playing through World War II in the Pacific one day at a time. And, one thing we've been seeing a lot of so far in this game is Japanese submarines kind of playing havoc with our convoy routes, and they're still appearing to do that. But at least in this case, it looks like we've got our submarines getting into the act, sinking a Japanese patrol boat north of Kwajalein. So that's an encouraging development. Our torpedoes and submarines are pretty bad at this stage, so it's good to see that we get a positive result there. Additionally, more Japanese submarine attacks here off the coast of New Zealand. An empty troop transport is getting hit. I do want to call out that most of these ships he's hitting are empty with the exception of cargo. So he's hit a few ships that look like troop transports, but the vast majority of those have actually already unloaded 95, 99%, and the last things they're unloading are a handful of guns that are difficult to unload because the ports aren't big enough, and as a result, they're getting hit, but we're not losing much. You can see the President Coolidge there was just torpedoed. She's a good example of that. Couple of guns there that were lost with the destruction of the Coolidge, or at least the damaging of the Coolidge, but all the troops are off. So, this is not a Mersing type of a scenario where he's devastating ground units of ours. He's hitting large numbers of troop transports that are empty, and if we're just honest with ourselves, if we think back about World War II, and if we look at the logistics in this game, the Allies are very capable of withstanding large numbers of merchant casualties. The United States lost more merchant shipping in World War II than any other country, and or at least more than every other allied country, and they were able to outproduce their losses vastly, and this game does model that. So that's one positive. One other thing I will call out is I do have destroyers in most of these convoys. There's very few convoys that are actually completely unguarded. We've seen an occasional gun attack, but the most of these are torpedoes. So I know a lot of you have been saying, screaming, you need to get your destroyers in action. They are. The problem is destroyers at this stage in the war basically are worthless for the Allies. American destroyers have about the same anti-submarine value at this stage as a minesweeper, which is basically nothing. It's ASW level 2, so your likelihood of actually succeeding in ASW operations is limited. Meanwhile, that was a breathful. You can see the Japanese just landed on Espiritu Santos, which is kind of in the direction of New Caledonia. It's a key port that has large port facilities, or the capability to build large port facilities. Not as much in the way of land-based aircraft, though. So it does seem like he's kind of building a bridge to New Caledonia and to the Fiji line. He took Tulagi last turn, or 2 turns ago. He took Shortland and the Solomons, and now he's taken Espiritu Santos. So again, he's moving further south down the Fiji line. I hope this isn't too sort of artificial and produced, this episode, guys. I actually recorded my reactions to this turn live when it was occurring. But apparently my microphone was kind of corrupted. The recording software had some glitch in it where it was causing some really bad static throughout the recording. So I had to go, after recording the gameplay, I had to go back and re-record the discussion around it. So that's what you're getting right now. I do apologize for that, guys. Unfortunately, it seems to do that every now and then with my microphone, and there's not much I can do about it other than close the recording program and reopen it. With that being said, we're moving on to the air phase. We can see here that the Japanese are continuing to fly sweeps over Medellin in the northern portion of the island of Sumatra. And I think I saw something over Singapore just there. Not really much in the way of actual bombing going on, but as you recall, we did ravage his Sally bombing force, so that presumably would weaken him a bit. Meanwhile, we're sending some aircraft after Mersing. We're trying to weaken his troops there. We've got quite a few troops arriving at Mersing here, so in the next turn or two. So we are trying to be mindful of our bomber casualties while also doing a little bit of disruption and fatigue to his ground units there, because I'd love to throw them into the sea at Mersing, but we'll see. I don't know how realistic that is. One of the things that I was kind of looking through some of my results in a previous game and also through the instructions, and it feels like Japanese troops are really able to withstand massive casualties, kind of like later in the war when you have all these island hopping campaigns where the Japanese fight to the last man. Allied units will surrender pretty readily when you get a healthy advantage against them, but Japanese troops won't, and we've seen that earlier in this playthrough as well, where we've had 6 or 7 or 8 to 1 attack odds at Mersing, and we've still failed to destroy the Japanese, so we just have to be a little bit careful with that. Meanwhile, our bomber is doing a little bit of damage, but not a ton in Mersing, and we're kind of moving further along, and there you have it. So the Japanese carrier fleet is spotted here near Nomaya. You've got 22 Val dive bombers hitting troop transports in New Caledonia. But again, the vast majority of those troops are already off. So this is an immersing type scenario. 3 APs might get destroyed, but you're talking 100 support vehicles and basically no soldiers that are being killed here. So meanwhile, I think I saw aircraft from the Shokaku, which is one of the fleet carriers, one of the main Japanese fleet carriers, which indicates to us that this is indeed the full-blown Kiributai. Additionally, it looks like there's about 50 aircraft in action in this raid, which is more than any of the Japanese light carriers, and it seems unlikely that the Japanese light carriers have moved this far south. Additionally, we've got another raid coming in here with another 27 aircraft, and these appear to be from, did I see, who's it? I'm trying to see, it's from the Hiru. So we can see here the Shokaku and the Hiru seem to be the fleet carriers that are involved in bombing our ships in this area. So again, presumably the bulk of the Japanese carrier fleet is getting into action down here. The first time we've seen them down here near New Caledonia, which does leave me to feel a little bit more comfortable about my carrier raid a little bit further north, because if he's all the way down here, we should be relatively safe further north. Meanwhile, quite a few ships damaged there, not going to lie. That's a bit of a setback, but nothing that, honestly, those ships are expendable. There's a fair bit of victory points behind a couple of them, but it really is not going to make a dent with the loss of those ships. And honestly, the more important thing was the fact that our soldiers more or less all got ashore, with the exception of some equipment. So the soldiers themselves are more valuable in this scenario than the ships. Unlike Japan, which fought the Battle of Guadalcanal and had its merchant marine ravaged in the campaign, the Western Allies can afford to have their merchant marine ravaged and still continue on. Meanwhile, we've got some anti-submarine action occurring near Pago Pago. Some ASW patrols are engaging Japanese submarines here. We've actually got a firing position, and they're starting to drop some depth charges. Apparently an internal explosion with some severe damage, so we might actually be doing some meaningful damage to these Japanese subs, which would be really nice to actually sink a couple of these things and weaken his submarine fleet. Japan doesn't get a ton of submarines, but they got a respectable amount. I think they had like 160 submarines in total. Some subs off Sydney, bottoming out and escaping detection. Some subs off Palmyra, with some patrol craft attempting to intercept it, which is interesting because I don't think I've seen Japanese Japanese subs off of Palmyra before. That seems to be a new development. Meanwhile, it looks like this turn is just about over, so we've got some fighting going in Xinjiang. That's going to succeed. That was essentially a non-unit. It was a very small unit that we just kind of moved in there because the Japanese didn't have any soldiers there, so we took the city for free, which then we forced him to counterattack the city, which should add additional damage to the city, and that's a good result for us. We had no hope of holding it. With that being said, we're coming to the end of the turn, so I think we're going to go ahead and jump out. The game's going to kick us out to the main screen, and we'll rejoin you in just a minute when we get to the actual turn where we can start issuing orders and looking at things. All right, well, we're back, and first things first, let's take a look at the intelligence reports. Last turn, we had some casualties. We lost 3 aircraft in the air, 1 on the field, and 1 op loss. Japan lost 1 in the field, 8 operational, and 3 flak. I'm assuming some of those losses... never mind. I assumed some of those losses were carrier losses, but it doesn't really look like it. They lost maybe 1-0 and 1 Claude. Those could have been ops losses, but otherwise not really. Nothing really huge in terms of casualties, just kind of a general, all right, you use these aircraft, and some aircraft were lost. In terms of ships sunk, that was a little bit of a heavier loss on our end this turn. We did lose a fair number of ships. A couple of them were important. Some of these troop transports had reasonable victory values. But at the end of the day, as I've already said, we should be able to replace all of these casualties without too much in the way of effort. These are, at the end of the day, they're peanuts. The APs, I feel like, are overvalued in this game, especially considering, eventually we're going to start getting like, LTVs and things like that. Or landing ship tanks, LSTs, not LTVs. But anyway, meanwhile, the Japanese losses, on the other hand, we claim 3 Japanese ships sunk, 2 subs, and 1 patrol boat. So it's yet to be seen if that was actual casualties, but we're saying 1 hit a mine and 1 was sunk by depth charges, and then the patrol boat was sunk by our submarines' torpedoes north of Kwajalein. So that's always a good result, considering those are anti-submarine warfare ships. Meanwhile, the Prince of Wales is limping away to South Africa. Float damage has dropped down to 59, and she's still maintaining her speed of 7 knots. She's moving incredibly slowly, however, and is a little bit low on fuel, so I'm going to order my oilers here to close the gap and refuel her so that she has enough fuel to get to South Africa. They'll have more than enough fuel to do that, and then we'll be, I think, good to release these guys to head back to the Dutch East Indies, where they can kind of load back up with fuel and shuttle some of it back to Australia. Now, meanwhile, if we go to the Cape Town hex and we take a look at the repulse, her damage hasn't really changed at all. She's still sitting with 20 float damage, still making 15 knots, still on the way back to Cape Town, probably about 8 days away from Cape Town at current speed. When it gets closer, I may sprint the last turn, but probably about 8 days till she arrives, and then I would guess about 30 to 40 days of repair time, so probably back in action in about a month and a half. This turn doesn't have a ton going on, to be honest. Not really doing much in Burma. Not a ton going on in China. We did have Cheng Chao flanked. We've already issued orders for those troops to pull out to the north, to the hex up there, because we can't feasibly hold ourselves in position where they are right now. So we do need to pull out to the north just a little bit. Otherwise, we'd get ourselves flanked and destroyed pretty easily. Loyang is also somewhat flankable from the roads. It does look like there's a road that goes into the rear, but it would also expose his supply line, where we could just advance into his rear and cut his supplies off. So that would seem like a very bad idea, to move up and to the left of Loyang, whereas Cheng Chao, the risk is much less. Meanwhile, Sinyang fell, as you saw during the combat results, and that's kind of about it. We're resting our troops in Yicheng. We can see their combat values coming up. They're up to about 1,700 garrison strength. We don't have a ton of supplies anywhere in China, so we're trying to preserve supplies there. If we take a look back on the Malay Peninsula and we go to Mersing, I'm going to go ahead and issue a bombardment attack order. mainly because I don't want to risk getting these troops destroyed. We need these guys to help hold Singapore when the main Japanese effort comes. So I just want to kind of feel them out, and I think the best way to feel them out is to use our guns in a bombardment attack. It is going to burn up some supply, but that's probably the best way for us to go at this stage. We do have a few other units elsewhere in the Malay Peninsula to the south. We've got a brigade at Singapore. We've got a brigade at Johor Bahru. Both of those brigades are reasonably fresh. The Singapore brigade we are allowing to kind of rest and relax and kind of get its health back up. But that's kind of the situation there. Meanwhile, if we swing a little bit south, we have some ASW operations occurring off Java. We're attempting to bring some additional supplies into Singapore from Palembang. It looks like our destroyer tender did arrive at Singapore without damage, so that's encouraging. It should bring about 3,000 additional supply there, and then we've got about 4,000 supply that we're going to try and bring in via the next ship about to leave Palembang. So assuming they both arrive safely, it should get our supplies much closer to around 50,000, which should make me feel a lot more comfortable with sort of the offensive operations I'm planning around Mersing, and I'm going to try and figure out how to pull supply north to Mersing. This game tracks supply weirdly, and key places like Singapore and Bataan, obviously they draw almost all the supply, and that's fine, and they get what they need, but it doesn't seem like any supply flows up to where the actual troops are who need those supplies in the operations at Mersing. So, eventually they do draw enough supply to meet their minimum needs, but they don't have a surplus so that if they bombard the very next turn, they're going to be out of supply, which is a little bit frustrating. Meanwhile, in the Philippines, it looks like Japan has arrived with one division at Clark Field. I probably don't have a strong enough force to throw him back there. We've got about 600 attack value. A division of his is probably 300 to 400, and despite the 2-to-1 advantage, it's not really sufficient for like a shock or a deliberate attack. We'd lose too many casualties and would be worse for the wear. So rather than attack and waste our soldiers, I'm just going to go ahead and maintain a defensive position. We do have a level 2 fort at Clark Field, so that should give us a bit of an advantage, and it's going to be more of a tripwire until he gets back to Bataan, where the bulk of our forces are located. I want to make sure I get the Bataan defenses up to a level 4 fort. They're about halfway there, so we need to try and hold out at Clark Field for a little bit more. Meanwhile, we have some supply convoys moving to Cebu and some other places in the Philippines in an effort to strengthen some of those smaller garrison units that don't have supplies against an eventual Japanese invasion there, to try and create as many headaches for the Japanese as possible as they look to expand their influence over the Philippines. Meanwhile, if we expand further to the east and down toward the Fiji line, we've detected the main Japanese carrier force to the northeast of Caledonia. We have several other ships which haven't sunk yet. The Dontron, which is only carrying supplies. We have the Lancashire, which is up north near Comac, which still has some troops on it. We have the President Coolidge, which is a transport that was wounded by enemy submarines, which is also attempting to get out of there. And then we have other task forces like Task Force 392 or Task Force 446, which have had orders that instead of continuing on their way to Nomaya, they're heading back to Australia until the enemy carriers clear out. Meanwhile, you can see he landed here at Espiritu Santos up here in the north. Seems to be a reasonable force, about 3,800 soldiers, about 30 guns. It's definitely more than a battalion or an SNLF or a Naval Guard unit, so it's probably a regiment or multiple battalions of landing troops there. Meanwhile, we have gotten, I think, the majority of our troops ashore on New Caledonia. And if we swing to the east here at Fiji, same story. We've lost, again, more ships to enemy submarines, but we're going to start pulling some of these ships out. Some of these guys don't have enough fuel to get out, so we're just going to kind of disband them into the port, which is a level 3 port, so they should be safe from enemy submarines. And I'll have to kind of figure out how to resupply them. In addition to that, I thought I ordered the Queen Elizabeth to move over to Suva, but she was still unloading, and she didn't move. So I canceled her unload orders and have ordered her back to New Zealand at flank speed, which is 29 knots. So she should be able to get right around to here by the end of the nighttime phase, and double that by the end of the day. So I'm assuming she should be able to get clear of the enemy carriers without them becoming aware, or without them being able to interdict. With that being said, we have detected enemy submarines near New Zealand, so we have formed up a couple of hunter-killer groups in the New Zealand area, which should scour the areas near Auckland in an effort to cut down on enemy submarine activities. If we swing east, we can see here we've got a bunch of convoys that are on their way to Pago Pago, including 2 more infantry regiments, 1 Marine, 1 Army. We also have about 26,000 supply on transports at Pago at the moment, currently unloading. And we've got quite a bit more still on the way, as well as a little bit of fuel. We're also trying to expand the port facility at Pago, but it is a max level size of 2, so we're going to be overstacking, which will result in slow action. Meanwhile, our carriers are up here near Johnston Island. Not going to go too much more into detail about them this turn. We've been talking about them in previous turns quite a bit. And we also have multiple anti-submarine warfare patrols coming out of Pearl Harbor. Our battleships are on their way back to the States. They haven't really seen any change in their float damage, so they're good there. Not a lot else happening in the continental United States or Canada or Australia or anywhere like that, honestly. The Yorktown is still on the way to Pearl, and I'm trying to think. There really isn't a lot else going on this turn, guys. We're kind of in flight. We're moving through the turn. But I don't have a ton going on this turn, so I guess, it's a bit of a shorter video, but we'll probably go ahead and kind of cut it off. We'll see what happens at Mersing. We'll see if the bombardments go well, or if maybe he's stronger than we think. He has revealed his carriers, so that is a big deal. They're moving toward New Caledonia, doing some raids and ravaging some shipping there, but he hasn't started any invasions other than Espiritu Santo, which is a little bit further north. We did have a recon at Tarawa that tells us there's an enemy vessels that are anchored there, but it's probably a little bit too far south to risk going after. We'll probably keep the main axis of our carrier strike north at Kwajalein. But yeah, I guess we'll see how things play out. But that's about all I've got for you guys. So I think we're going to go ahead and sign off here. I hope you guys enjoy this video as always. And, the only other thing, I guess, is the Yorktown, which is on the way from San Diego, is on its way to Pearl Harbor with a light cruiser and a destroyer. I don't know if I highlighted that last turn or not, but that's sort of the only other call out. She's got 36 dive bombers, 12 torpedo bombers, and 17 fighters. The fighters are under strength. They should have about 10 more. The dive bombers are at full strength, and the Devastators are slightly below strength, 12 out of a potential 15. But again, that's all I got for you right now, guys. So I'm going to go ahead and sign off here. Hope you enjoyed this video as always. And until next time, this is the Historical Gamer saying thank you for watching. Hope you're rooting on our team. And until next time, I'm out.